Joining us now, the star in Florida, Karen Giorno. She ran the Trump for President campaign in Florida. She was one of the first people to join the Trump team, and she engineered the stunning Florida victory that annihilated Marco Rubio and knocked him out of the race. That was all Karen Giorno. Then it was basically Karen Giorno that had the strategy in place to win Florida for the president in November, one of the key states he had to win to put him over the top. So she's my hero. She's with us now, Karen Giorno. Karen, great to have you with us.
Hey, John. Good morning.
I know you're fired up today. I want to get to the Florida Senate primary. It's coming up now in about, 8 weeks, I think, August 25th or something. So we only got 2 months away. Let's talk about this race. DeSantis and Putnam. Putnam now kind of like the establishment candidate. He's a Secretary of Agriculture, and, he's kind of the moderate that everybody likes, and he doesn't take any positions and doesn't do talk radio. Then you've got the Congressman DeSantis running for governor, who is a Trump supporter, kind of got the president's endorsement for governor, but kind of didn't. Some say he did, some say he didn't. Now the president's backed off on that. What's going on in this gubernatorial primary?
Well, let's first start with the Senate race, because that's kind of what's heating up and what's getting in the papers currently with regard to how nervous Democrats are that Florida has now become one of the top 5 vulnerable states in the nation for Bill Nelson to hold his seat. Because of Rick Scott is probably running, and he's the current governor, did a phenomenal job over the last 7.5 years. And in spite of the Obama years, by the way, he still has brought jobs to Florida. He has shown tremendous leadership in times of adversity, especially with the current hurricanes. He gets the citizens of Florida, and he is probably running, this is no joke, he is probably running one of the best campaigns in the nation right now. So if you want to pay attention to how to run a campaign, pay attention to Rick Scott's campaign. He's won twice as governor, always kind of the underdog, never really kind of clicking with establishment. However, if you want to pick a winner, you want to pick the right horse, you pick Rick Scott, because he's one of the hardest working candidates, elected officials that I've had the pleasure of serving. And quite frankly, the Floridians who got engaged with his 2 campaigns are re-engaged in this campaign, and he's got a tremendous army on the ground and groundswell of support to catapult him to victory. So if I were the Democratic Party in Florida, if I were the Democratic Party here in Washington, D.C., I'd be extremely nervous, because he's essentially making the Democrats spend money where they need. They really shouldn't have to. Bill Nelson is a 3-term U.S. senator, and usually incumbents, they have a pretty good opportunity for a 4th term. But he's nowhere to be found. He doesn't campaign. He's completely out of touch with Florida. He's completely out of touch with the American people in general. So, Rick Scott is the guy to watch nationwide and in Florida.
Is Scott going to win this race?
Scott's going to win this race. It's going to be, I don't like to always make these types of predictions, John, because, campaigns are, minute by minute, things happen.
Right.
But you also can't avoid looking at trends. Trends say a lot. And the fact that Rick Scott is running neck and neck, and in some polls actually pulled ahead of Bill Nelson, even before he had announced, there were these interesting polls coming out of speculation. And he's only gaining in popularity, and gaining grassroots support, and gaining with the donor base, and gaining with just his ability to be seen not only nationwide but in Florida as a leader, as a doer, as somebody, as the politician that is really in tune with his citizens that he represents. Rick Scott, to me, is probably the politician of the future that we want moving forward. Pay attention to his race.
All right, so we're going to keep an eye on the big race in Florida for U.S. Senate. Governor Rick Scott going against incumbent Democratic Senator Bill Nelson, former astronaut. Karen Giorno here saying Scott running a great campaign, predicting victory for Scott. That would be a huge pickup in the U.S. Senate for Republicans. Let's get to the other race I'm following, which is the gubernatorial primary, Putnam and DeSantis. It seemed like, Putnam had a big lead. Now DeSantis seems to be catching some fire. But what about this endorsement from the president? Like, DeSantis is saying he's got his endorsement, but other people saying, well, not really. What's the deal?
Your guess is as good as mine with regard to endorsements. The idea of a candidate relying on an endorsement, however, is really not a wise thing, right? You have to go out there and you have to earn the trust and the vote of the voter. And, DeSantis had a slow start. He's doing much better than the last conversation you and I had. The ground team is in place. You're starting to see a little bit more momentum in the what we call the win strategy counties. And quite frankly, you're beginning to see people kind of pay attention to his race. Now, Adam Putnam still is a formidable opponent. He knows how to win statewide race in Florida. He's got ample money to put towards his operations, and he's well known. He's got very strong name recognition, and he's a likable person. He's a likable guy who knows Florida. So it's DeSantis's race to lose, and he, the Trump base that I talk to on a fairly regular basis in Florida. They want to support DeSantis because the president has kind of nodded in his direction that's someone who would do a good job as the next governor of Florida to replace Governor Scott. Everyone has to work really super hard here. And let me tell you why, John. You mentioned that we have a late primary in August, but the majority of Floridians vote by absentee ballot, which dropped in July, and they vote in early voting, which is at least 2 weeks prior to Election Day. So in some regions, there are numbers upwards of about 72% of Floridians that will have voted before Election Day in August. So really, you got to close the deal now.
You know what? I'm so glad you brought that up because people don't realize that are outside of Florida, that you really have to you're campaigning now as if the race is in the final stages. You can't really wait until the last 2 weeks in August because 70% of the people have already cast a ballot, or 50 to 70%, I remember reading somewhere, especially in a primary in August because people got things to do. So that is a good point. If the election were held right now, today, Karen Giorno, who would win, Putnam or DeSantis?
I think it would be very close. Right now, the gap is closed, and it's really going to be on who's working the hardest out there to earn votes. But I want to switch gears real quickly, John, too. DeSantis is vacating his congressional seat in District 6. That's another congressional CD district that you have to look at and watch. There's an interesting race going on there now. 3 Republicans in the primary. 2 of them don't even live in the district. The only candidate who lives in District 6, again, they're fighting to replace Ron DeSantis, is Fred Costello, who is a known brand and essentially working very, very hard every single day to earn votes, and is a MAGA candidate, was an early supporter of the president, and has the support and backing of Citizens for Trump and the grassroots movement for Trump in District 6. The other 2, John Ward and Michael Walsh, don't live in the district. They're newbies to politics. I don't necessarily think that's a terrible thing, but John Ward's statement recently, and I'm paraphrasing, don't hold me to it, but the sentiment is there, that our Puerto Rican brothers and sisters who just came off one of the most tragic events recently with a hurricane, who came over to Florida to regroup and rebuild, may still be living here during our election season. And they are very much American citizens and can register and vote in Florida. We encourage them to vote Republican. And John Ward essentially came out and said that they do not have a right to vote in Florida. They shouldn't be allowed to vote in Florida. And I'm not sure he actually realizes that they're American citizens.